Hello and welcome to this episode of the World Extreme Medicine podcast. My name's Dr. Will Duffin. I'm recording this episode on day 211 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 1/5 of the country is currently occupied by Russian troops, but the Ukrainian military has recently mounted a number of successful counteroffensives around Kherson and Kharkiv, prompting President Putin to announce a partial mobilization of more troops. And the Western media is rife with fear and speculation on what might happen next and how far Putin will go to achieve the objectives of his special military operation. It can all seem very bleak, but one ray of positivity in all of this for me has been those members of the international medical community who've chosen to step up and help. And one such organisation is Medics for Ukraine. I spoke with the founders, Manchester-based paramedic and expedition leader Luca Alfatti, and Devon-based CEO, Honorary Associate Professor and Volunteer Coast Guard Mark Hannaford. From humble beginnings, Medics for Ukraine have managed to deliver over £1.3 million worth of medical supplies via road convoys directly to the front line, along with training over 270 Ukrainian medics in battlefield casualty care. And in this episode, I asked them about how they began, how they scaled up their operations, the challenges, frustrations, triumphs, and what it's like on the ground to travel east of Lviv during the current crisis. So here is my conversation with Medics for Ukraine. Mark and Luca, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to be here too.
So let's start with the very inception of Medics for Ukraine. And Mark, perhaps you could answer this one. How did it all begin?
Well, I think it started obviously with the invasion of Ukraine. And I think like lots of people watching the unfolding events, it felt like Europe, our society was stepping back 40, 50 years. It seemed unjust. It seemed unfair. And we wanted to support our medical colleagues, the medical community in Ukraine, as they sort of struggle to come to terms with the invasion. So we kind of gathered ourselves. We kind of asked for a show of hands of people who are free to help with the idea of running trauma supplies to our medical colleagues in Ukraine. And loads of people put their hand up. But Luca shouted loudest and jumped highest, and so Luca joined me in the kind of in the mission to get much needed life-saving trauma supplies. Originally, we thought to concentrate on paediatric hospitals, which was a similar thing to when we ran our sort of children's convoy to Syria. But we quickly realised actually the need, whilst present, wasn't as urgent as the need on the front line, with frontline medics and frontline soldiers, obviously as a result of the conflict, getting killed, having severe injuries. So we found ourselves focusing more and more on supplying those frontline units and supporting those frontline medics.
And Luca, you've been involved with this since its inception, and you began as a very small outfit, just running small convoys across the border, and it's evolved into this huge operation. Can you perhaps speak to how it has grown in this way, and what your role has been along the journey?
It's basically got a life of its own by now, and I would like to say there's been a lot of serendipity throughout the whole journey, basically. It all began with me answering a call from a stranger, a Polish now friend of ours, Lucas, in Poland, that had friends in Ukraine and was asking for help. He was asking for medical supplies because he had direct contact with people in Kherson. And I just replied and said, I think we can help. And from there, it just escalated. So Mark came back from Mauritania, I think Mark was. And I had already a few volunteers lined up in Poland and in Ukraine. 2 or 3 of them connected. However, a few others actually did not know each other. I just got them from different contacts that I had before. And through all our contacts and friends, we managed to get enough donations to fill up 2 vans. Mark, myself, a paramedic friend of mine, Mike, and Peter, who was the stranger at the time, who answered one of our calls for drivers, ended up driving to the border with Ukraine. And at the time, we weren't very sure about the security situation, which was and it is always in the back of our minds. However, by then I've had basically 24-hour contacts for almost 3 weeks with Ukraine, and I really felt compelled to go and meet them face to face. In this day and age of digital, interviewing, podcasts, and so on and so forth, I still felt that I needed to shake their hand and look them in the eyes. Mark agreed. Basically, we crossed the border with the help of Svetlana, who is now a key part of our operations. Svetlana is a Ukrainian lady from Kyiv, who has been, since day one, has been running across the border several times, sometimes a day, several times a week, just filling in the gaps. So people that needed, whatever they needed. It can be medical supplies, but it can be anything. And so we got into Lviv in a bunker hospital, where we met our first few connections. And I had the moment where I sat back with Mark and I looked around and it's like, majority of these people didn't know each other up until we put them together for this one delivery. And obviously they all brought their own experience, expertise, their own experience and expertise. And now, basically, they are running their own operations in Ukraine with our support, with very minimal supervision from us. And we know where everything is going. We know that it's going to support families. We had equipment going into Kherson whilst it was not surrendered, it was encircled, it was occupied. We still managed to get stuff through into the city. Kharkiv, Dnipro, Odessa, we just had all our equipment in the front line at the time of need, thanks to the local volunteers. There's obviously a lot more to it, but that is basically just keeping connection and believing in people.
I mean, the degree of penetration you've achieved into the country with those supplies is amazing, as you said, right into the front lines. And Mark, can you give us an insight into what kind of logistics is required to get convoys of essential medical and trauma supplies that far in? How have you been able to get those supply lines up and running?
Yeah. So, well, as Luca said, this is very much a steep learning curve for us. We didn't, we hadn't run an operation on this scale like this before. We'd run a pediatric hospital into Syria when the last hospital was bombed in Aleppo. However, that was kind of like drive there, drop it, and then the local team in Syria then sort of took care of the other end. Here it's very much, we gather the equipment, we fundraise for the equipment, we purchase the equipment, we pack the equipment, we drive the equipment, we get with partners, the equipment and supplies across the border, then to a hub that we have in Western Ukraine. And from there, it's distributed by small cars by volunteers who might well have a connection to the unit and the people that they're delivering to. They might be their father, their son, their brother, their daughter, their mother. So, it makes for a very tenacious system and a very sort of slick and direct system. It's not one that we knew that we were going to set up. And as Luca's intimated, it's very much based upon, the bravery, energy, and again, the tenacity of the local volunteers. And they do put themselves at considerable risk to make these drops. But we also know that the drops result in people's lives being saved, but also recovery being improved. So, post-injury, their recovery is swifter, their prognosis is better. So, we know it's worthwhile, but it's not without risk. But because we're a small, very targeted organisation, it does make us quite invisible. So that makes moving around the country, easier perhaps than if we were having to run a large food aid organisation. But that said, we just work with an amazing group of local volunteers, some of who've been displaced and some of whom sadly have lost family members. But without exception, their lives have been changed by the recent events.
I think you're in a unique position there, Mark, as a small organisation that makes you more agile, and you're less constrained by the bureaucracy of larger outfits. And also, it's amazing to see how you've built those human connections within the country through those local people. And that continues to this day. I mean, looking at social media, it's full of videos of frontline soldiers expressing their gratitude for the work that you've done.
I think, well, we were concerned. One of the things we very much teach on our courses and the conferences, not to get in the way of aid agencies when a natural disaster or when there's an unfolding humanitarian emergency. Let the professional organisations do their job and don't get in the way. I think with Ukraine, though, however, it's different because the scale of the need is so great. It's also, we found ourselves in a really interesting position, having a unique network and a unique set of contacts, and also a unique skill set that actually, in our very targeted niche, we could do a pretty effective job and actually fill a gap that wasn't being able to be filled by the larger agencies because the challenge facing them was so great. So Luca and I held off for a few weeks to make sure that what we were doing was, one, was needed, two, was worthwhile, and three, was sustainable in terms of people, it being worthwhile in the long term. Because the other thing we wanted to avoid is giving short-term aid and then taking it away. We wanted to make sure that we could sustain this. And of course, some of that is dependent on sponsorship from outside. And that's, something we'll talk about slightly later on. But those were our three aims, sort of targeted, achievable, and sustainable.
And Luca, tell me about what you perceive the need to be in terms of provision of medical supplies. What need has been out there, and how have you been meeting that?
There are unmet needs of all kind, to be completely honest. We have not only been providing trauma medical supplies to the frontline, which is what we've been asked to do, and that's what we've been focusing in doing. However, we also have been fortunate enough to be invited to visit a few hospitals in the country. And these are functional hospitals with very well qualified and amazing doctors, consultants, and so on. And it's evident that there is a massive shortage of primary care medications as well. So we're still focusing on the trauma and the trauma supplies that we are delivering to the front line. That's always on the top of the list, from tourniquets to hemostatic gases agents to stretchers, anything to get the soldiers, but civilians as well, off the front line onto the back of an ambulance and somewhere where they can get definitive care. So that's been our main focus. However, because of how well we've been doing in delivering this side of the operation, we are also approached by hospitals and clinics for different matters, as I said, for primary care medications, which in our small remit we have helped in several occasions. So that is the main two. And to be fair, even though the situation is very changeable in the front line, the medical needs are not really. The medical needs are still exactly the same. They still need trauma supplies. They still need trauma medication. They still need training to be able to deal with the injuries that they obviously see, and the pattern of injuries that they see in the front line. And hospitals are still short of life-saving medication as well. Because one thing that I mean, I'm not a humanitarian, or maybe I am by now, but I wasn't. And what I've obviously very much hit me is that, there is a war and we're looking at people dying in the front line and so on, but there is a huge numbers, millions and millions of people. They are civilians, population that they cannot leave, they cannot flee. People with chronic diseases, people that have limited mobility, elderly. They're just left behind with absolutely no support. And that's what the clinics and the clinics and hospitals try to do, but sometimes with no supplies. Another request we had, for example, this is something that came a few months back, was mental health medications in mental health institutions, completely, left on their own device. So there is a lot of need there.
Yeah, I think it's easy to focus on the battlefield medicine, that dimension, and forget that there's a civilian population with all the same health needs, and if not more, due to living in an area of conflict, and that's all there.
And the way the war in Ukraine is developed, really, it's not really a face-to-face, as you would imagine, war where you're like just a few hundred yards from the front line. It's more of shelling and missiles and so on. So that the civilian population is at the front line with the military population. So the trauma supplies that we deliver, they don't only help the soldiers and the army, but they are used by default to try to save civilian population life as well.
Mm-hmm. And Mark, as an organisation, you've been very successful in securing supplies from well-resourced settings like the UK. Tell us a little bit more about how that's worked, how you've been able to achieve donations of medical equipment and get that then to where it's needed in Ukraine.
I think we're in. I said at the beginning, we felt we were in a unique situation with our contact base, our network, and our collective experience, and also our skill set. So we've been amazed by the support of the medical community and the way that they sent us supplies essentially. When speaking to people, I talk about the convoys, the fact we're delivering convoys, and the fact that we're delivering training. But I use the phrase that the convoys are literally a vehicle for sponsorship, because, we'll buy enough supplies to make a convoy worthwhile. But we'll find before the day of departure, pallet loads of other supplies come in from other people who've heard that a convoy is going, and all of a sudden we'll get, deliveries from all over the country and all over the world of trauma supplies to join that convoy. So, for instance, if we spend £40,000 on supplies for the convoy, as often as not, we're delivering 120 because that's what's being delivered to our warehouse in Manchester. So that expression that the convoys are a vehicle for sponsorship and donations of supplies is true. And also we've been very fortunate to, by the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, be donated their excess medical supplies. We've had one of the students on the MSc program in extreme medicine, a guy called Eric Linder, based in the States, just happened to have £500,000 worth of quick cloth and hemostatic agent sitting around in his warehouse. He generously donated that. So, we've had some amazingly generous donations come in from people with supplies, and from the Coast Guard, from the ambulance service, from all walks and types of life.
Yeah, the generosity of these individuals and organisations has been really incredible, and how everyone's been moved by what's been going on in Ukraine is coming together to help these people. You started out running the convoys, providing those essential supplies, but things expanded along the way, and you've also branched out into training. Luca, tell me how that came together, how you ended up providing medical training out in Ukraine as well.
This is it is a good question, because it's sort of, I wouldn't say sort of just happened, but our main partner, friend, very good friend over in Ukraine from Kherson, Stefan, him and Nazer, they've got some very good contact within the military, special forces and territorial army. And after our first trip into Ukraine, we have been invited back specifically. So basically, the word was spreading. There's these guys that seem to know what they're doing, and they're really willing to help. Shall we invite them back and have a bit of a conversation and see how they can help us? So we went back in just at the same time as Convoy 2 went back in, and we sat with some MPs of the Zelensky government, really, as well as quite high up people within the military and special forces. And we just had meetings. We went to a lot of meetings around Kiev, Lviv, and a few other places. I guess they just wanted to see how credible we were and how serious we were. And from that, we have received many requests from different parts of the country, not necessarily just the same battalion, for example, the same unit, not just special forces, but also territorial army, for example, for training, which we have answered to, and we have met for what we can do. Obviously, we have trained now over 350 individuals in between doctors, medics, and soldiers in combat casualty care. So it was a combination of the credibility that we brought to with the convoys and the fact that we actually stuck with it. It wasn't just a one-off, which often happens, which is still very welcome. But as we were kept coming back, they're like, these guys are serious. We can actually trust them. We can use resources which are very thin, because obviously we are fighting a war against Russia. We can use some resources to look after these guys when they're here and provide and free some medics for training, because they understand how important it is to be able to provide their casualty care frontline. That's what it makes a difference in between saving a life and not saving a life.
Is it hard to release people from the front line for training? Presumably in Ukraine, a large proportion of the fighting force are engaged in combat. Was it quite hard to get people to step back from that to engage with your sessions?
It is hard. There's a lot of work in the background within our partners in Ukraine. Dates can change last minute, which we're trying obviously to fix on a calendar, and it's never exactly what you're going to expect. Maybe they tell us it's going to be 20 people because some are going to be deployed, or the area of attacks has changed, or whatever they might be. And our last team were expecting a team of 30 to train, and they found themselves in a room with 100 people, all willing and all very eager to actually understand what. To get combat casualty care. So it's I wouldn't say frustrating, because it's not the right word, but it requires a high degree of flexibility from ourselves and them, and a lot of very good communication to try to make it happen. So far, as always happened, no training has been cancelled. If anything, we have more people than expected. However, they are very honest in saying, we have this amount of people, but they might get a last minute call and we'll have to go frontline, and that's what it is. One of the training Mark and I did was for a territorial army group within the greater Kiev region, and none of those guys have been deployed yet, but they could have been deployed any minute or any day, in the future, and it's just the reality of what's going on.
And Mark, apart from yourself and Luca, which other medics from the UK or elsewhere have you been able to engage to deliver the training in country?
We've got quite a team, quite a robust team now that have, and I can't say names at all for security reasons, but they generally have extensive combat experience as medics in small group special operation type environments. So they're the perfect people for teaching medics deploying into the front line for this type of conflict. sadly that they're needed, but really, an amazingly valuable resource for the guys on the Ukrainian end. And as Luca was intimating, the people we're teaching can range from people who've never been to the front line and have not so much medical background, to some amazing medics who are just incredible clinicians with lots of experience. And having that experience within the team allows us to be flexible, to teach at all levels, and to respond to the group of people that we're presented with. Because, as Luca said, it is a dynamic situation. People, aren't always where they're expected to be at a certain time because of the conflict. So having a team of that caliber does really give us that sort of bandwidth and that flexibility, so that we can teach newbie medics going to the front line for the first time who are anxious, let's say, put it that way, to veteran medics who want to know the latest thought process, the latest protocols, the latest treatment patterns, and and learn from the knowledge that sits within our pool of faculty.
And Mark, I'm also interested to know, both you and Luca have been into Ukraine on this convoy. This isn't something you're managing from a field. You are intimately involved with the delivery of the supplies and also the combat casualty care. What are your reflections on seeing Ukraine firsthand? Most of us are just reliant on news reports, but you've been on the ground. You've been well past Kiev. What are your reflections on what you're seeing on the ground in Ukraine in terms of how that country is faring during this crisis?
I think it's an experience of contrasts. I live down in Devon. In many respects, traveling through Western Ukraine is like being in the West Country. Fields of crops. It's when we've been there in the summer, it's been beautiful sunshine and largely untouched. And then all of a sudden you'll come to this band of utter destruction. And I mean, just utter destruction. You get the sense where blood is being spilt. It's still very fresh in many places. But the level of destruction is just incredible. And I think largely because of the use of artillery, not only is the ground obliterated, but the sky is obliterated, the trees are obliterated. Animals are walking around shell-shocked. And it's that contrast between everyday normal life and the utter devastating reality of modern warfare. But, from a personal point of view, with the people you meet and the certain people we're engaging with, their spirit of resistance and their determination to be their own people, is incredible. And their sense of injury, not just because, physical injury because of injuries from warfare, but also the sense of injury from being invaded by, what they considered to be a familial neighbor, has kind of very much hardened that sense of, affront and offense. So it gives them great, and I think that's where, a lot of the successes are coming from, because they're determined in their resistance to really, and it runs deep.
Luca, do you ever worry about your own safety and security when you head east of Lviv?
It's a good question, and we're fool to say I don't, because obviously I do, and we all do. So there is always the element in the back of our minds. Is it safe? Are we going to be safe? It feels safe. It does. The majority of the west of the country, it does feel safe. Life goes on. Restaurants are open. Shops are open. There's often at the border there is a longer queue getting into Ukraine than getting out of Ukraine, and that started fairly early on, a few months back. Very proud people, very reliable people as well. So it just, you get in, you're a bit worried, and then you are within the country like, I feel safe. They are looking after us. We are under the protection of, the special forces and so on and so forth. However, there is always this this war in the back of your mind. Modern technology, now you download an app, and it's the air raid app, and the app goes off if there is an air raid. The thing is, I can tell you where this air raid is going to be in the country. So it just goes off. And, the first few times you're like, right, what do I need to do? And you just go and obviously hide underground somewhere. We had this in Lviv on one of our trips. So it's just a reminder that it's a country of war, that nowhere is really safe. But you can be lulled into thinking that you are safe. So it's really hard to explain, actually. There were some problems obviously at home as well. In a few months back, we've gone into Ukraine several times within a short period of time, so we're pretty much always in. And that explaining to family and friends, are you going to be safe? And like, I think I am, but you just don't know. So there's also that element where you're like, well, yeah, I am taking a risk, and sometimes you're like, why am I doing this? Is it worth it taking that risk? How do I explain that to my wife, to my kids? And then you're on the ground and you see what we're doing is making a difference. We hear that what we're doing is making a difference. We're asked to come back over and over and over again. And it's like, well, yes, it is worth it. And we will keep doing it in the safest way as possible. But, I could walk out the house tomorrow and be hit by a bus. So there's always there is a risk that you're happy to take and risks that you're not happy to take. So, yes, we're not going frontline, but we are going into Ukraine because, well, they need us. And, one day it might be reverse situation.
Luca, Mark, thank you for sharing such candid reflections of what it's like to be doing this operation. I think many people listening will be moved by that, and many will be wondering, how can they either volunteer to be part of your deployment, or can they donate to your cause? Mark, what would be the best way for people to do that?
Well, there are kind of four ways. So volunteering, we need two types of volunteers. We need convoy drivers who are prepared to drive the vehicles from Manchester, where our hub is, to the Polish border, where it's unloaded and then transshipped by the Polish Red Cross. And those vehicles then return to Manchester. So volunteer drivers who are able to do their Manchester to Poland drive and back. We also, as I was speaking, need volunteers to teach, but they have to have extensive combat casualty care experience. But we would love to hear from you. And Luca's the point of contact for that. Donations, I appreciate people would like to donate, and they can do that through our GoFund page. If you search for Medics for Ukraine, GoFundMe. But what we would really, we're keen to build relationships with companies who might want to sponsor the activities that we're undertaking. And in that case, that'd be great for that people to approach us directly. Not dissimilarly, trauma supplies, if we don't have to buy them, if they're donated, we can pack our vehicles to the roofs with trauma supplies. So anybody that has a source of trauma supplies that they'd be happy to donate would be absolutely amazing. And again, contact myself or Luca. I'm actually going overseas and off comms for a couple of weeks, but Luca would be more than glad to sort of respond to any messages that come in that way. So volunteering is volunteering as a driver or as a combat care teacher. Donations either individually, but ideally as a company, if a company would sponsor us to sponsor the costs of the convoys, it's important to highlight that all the operational costs are covered by World Extreme Medicine and myself. So 100%, which is not something that most organizations of our type can say. 100% of the donation goes entirely on buying trauma supplies and going to Ukraine. And yeah, we're here to, we'd love to hear from anybody that could offer help of that type.
Luca, any final thoughts from you before we draw things to a close?
Just to add on what Mark said, if another thing that we are recently looking for, and if anyone can help, please get in touch with me, is medical training equipment. airway heads, anything like that that can help us make the training even better and more realistic, that'd be great. And other than that, we're going to keep going. So if you guys want to be, if anyone wants to be part of it and want to help us out, just get in touch. Everyone can do their little bit, and we're here. Give us a call.
It's nothing short of remarkable how much Medics for Ukraine has achieved in such a short space of time since war broke out in February last year. So earlier this year, in fact, it's all so recent. Thank you so much for your time today, outlining what it is you've been doing. And if anyone wishes to reach out, the details to contact Mark and Luca will be in the show notes, along with more information about Medics for Ukraine. But thank you both for your time today.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the World Extreme Medicine podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. And if you want to meet lots of other risk-taking, rule-bending, and inspirational people, then you need to be in Edinburgh on the 19th to the 21st of November for this year's conference. Tickets are on sale now. Go to extrememedicineexpo.com to find out more.